We're going live in a moment. Yeah. Done. All right, cool. I'll drop you the link, Jeff.
I already got it.
Good job, Dad.
Okay, cool. We are live. Welcome everyone to React Denver. It's January 2020, the 18th of January. And I'm excited to have a talk today on TypeScript, which I'm still figuring out. I use it all the time. I'm still learning it. And there's a lot to learn about it. We're going to dive into some of those things today. Jeff, I dropped you the link in the chat if you don't have it. There it is. Thank you. I wanted to share that today is the speaker today. I think it's our first time speaker at this meetup, and we'd love to have more of that this year. We'd love to hear from, frankly, every single one of you at some point. Everyone's got something to share from a different perspective with different experiences, and we'd love to support you in that. So especially if you're a first-time speaker for our meetup or at all, reach out to us. I'm going to drop a link on meetup.com and the Zoom chat and everywhere I can find a place to put it to submit a, hey, here's an idea for a talk, or hey, I'm interested. It's just a Google form, just submit, and then we can reach out to you in the coming months. If anyone is hiring for their team, or if they're looking for work, we want to invite you to post on our meetup page, post a comment there. You can also, if you're in the Zoom right now, live, you can post in the chat there. You can post a job link. You can post your personal resume, your LinkedIn, whatever you want to do, just and introduce yourself. We want to very much encourage that. We don't get to do that in person right now. So doing it virtually actually is pretty easy. It makes it easy to just pass those links around and say things and make sure that more people can hear that you're hiring or hear who you are. So we want to absolutely welcome that and facilitate that as much as we can. There's at least one person in this meetup right now that I met last year that has a job at my company. So it definitely works out really well to meet people here. And I want to say that after the talk, we usually stick around for somewhere between like 30 to 60 minutes. And we just keep chatting until things kind of peter out. So there's always time later on to join the conversation, say hi, and share what you're looking for, things like that, or just talk shop. So with that, I want to do one more thing before we kick off the talk. I want to give a big shout out to Zoom. They sponsored us before things got crazy almost 2 years ago. And they gave us a really big, one of our biggest sponsorship sort of deals, if you will, and agreed to sponsor us for many months. And then the pandemic hit and we needed them, and they've come through. So we really appreciate Zoom. Thank you so much for supporting our meetup. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce Bishop. Bishop, I don't even know how to pronounce your last name, so I'm not going to say it wrong. I'll let you introduce yourself and say your full name. But Bishop is somebody who's been attending the meetup, and we're really excited to have him talk about TypeScript. Bishop, I'll kick it off to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, glad to be here. Bishop Zara, that's how you would say it. Zara would be maybe more culturally accurate, something like that. Yeah, let me share my screen. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. So 1 second. So yeah, I've been doing front end development for, I don't know, 20 years now, something like that. I used to teach at a university, so I was an academic, and then I got into motion design and then into JavaScript, and I've been working in advertising and at startups and stuff like that for, I don't know, the last 10 years. Currently, I work for a company called Project 202. Yeah, it's the best company I've ever worked for. We are hiring. We only hire seniors though. We don't hire juniors. So, but if you're a senior and you're looking for a change, by all means, look us up, Project 202. Yeah, from any to unknown and no warranty. So I'm not here on behalf of P202. I'm not speaking for them. I'm just a dude who likes TypeScript and thought it'd be fun to talk about it. And from any to unknown and beyond. Yeah, because that's the direction we want to go to, is from any's to unknowns. And I'm going to give this kind of try to give it like a flowery intro with like a bunch of math words. If you're like, it's supposed to be for all skill levels. So like, don't be scared by the math words. You don't need to understand complex mathematics in order to use TypeScript. But that's how I'll introduce it. So TypeScript is a set of types, and as such is governed by set theory, which is a field of mathematics. And there's this theorem in set theory that any set of sufficient size, and TypeScript is of sufficient size, can either be complete or consistent. Can't be both. So TypeScript had a decision to make. Do we make it? Yeah. So that's what they did. They made it complete, but they made it inconsistent. And the inconsistent part of TypeScript is any. That's also the complete part. The reason that TypeScript can model anything is because they include this type called any. And it's magical. In terms of mathematics, it's both a superset of every other type and a subset of every other type. And you can't do that. If we built a version of set theory that did allow this to happen, then like 1 + 1 wouldn't equal 2. I mean, that's how fundamental to mathematics this is. So any is extremely magical. And the bad part is that it just disables all type checking. It breaks contracts, it spreads. It was really just meant for us as developers. Any should not be in published code. There is no reason that you ever have to publish an any. I mean, if you're typing something, you like want to get past a problem and you're like, I just put any there for now, and then I can go focus on something else. Then you're going to come back and fix the any, right? You don't leave the any there. Because in every single case, unknown is better than any. If you ever have an any, you can replace it with unknown. So we're going to look at how to do that. And a kind of corollary to that, as is the keyword in TypeScript that you use to cast a variable as a type. As is a bad practice. There are times when you may need to use as, but is always a better alternative. So is preferred to as, but sometimes as is necessary. Unknown is preferred to any. Any is never what we want. So yeah, if you guys have any thoughts or questions, feel free to shout them out. Oh, I'm going to try and open up. Oh, I can't open the chat window. Word. All right, well.
I'll just say I'm loving this so far. Thank you.
Sweet, cool. So before we can get to any and unknown, to really like suss all this stuff out, we need a kind of good understanding of how objects are defined in TypeScript, because there's lots of different ways. And particularly if you're like new to TypeScript or you have somebody in Slack that you can like talk to about it, you can bring up these examples. These are gold. Just bring them up and they will start talking. They'll start talking for hours probably about, why am I able to take a string and put it into this thing that is an empty type, empty object? That shouldn't accept a string. Here I type it with lowercase object and I put an array in, no TypeScript error. Or if I use uppercase object, null, no TypeScript error. So why is this true? Let's try and figure that out. So in TypeScript, you can use the uppercase letter, but uppercase object refers to the JavaScript class object. And that's governed by the JavaScript specification. So we don't kind of want to mix the two, our TypeScript definitions with the class definitions in JavaScript. So this does kind of work, but it can be null. It has lots of unexpected behaviors, so never use it. And that's true of all the uppercase objects. Now, in other cases, though, if we don't use uppercase number, we use number with a lowercase n. We don't use uppercase string, we use lowercase string. So we think, don't use uppercase object, use lowercase object. And lowercase object is in fact provided to us by TypeScript. This is TypeScript's generic object definition. And it can be an object or an array or null or undefined. That is not very specific. And oftentimes when we're trying to type something as object, we know more about it. We know it's not an array. We know it's not undefined, things like that. So, and this is the ideal case. This is what we're looking for. Everything should be a shape. TypeScript really wants us to say it's an object, okay, but then it has a property and that property is of type something. That's the ideal case. And it's very easy that if we're going through here and we're subtracting things, we may end up with the empty object pattern, which for JavaScript seems fine, but in TypeScript, totally not fine. The empty object pattern means it's not undefined and not null, but it can be a string, a number, an array, be all kinds of things. So again, this is horribly inspecific. And this is really like my inspiration for doing the talk is I I end up doing code review for a lot of backend developers where JavaScript wasn't their first language, and they learned JavaScript and TypeScript at the same time. And since I learned them separately, I learned JavaScript first. When I see the TypeScript stuff, it just sticks out at me, like really apparently, but they don't always understand that differentiation because TypeScript doesn't run in the runtime code. It's only a type checker that runs ahead of time. So it doesn't actually fix anything. And so it's good if we have a clear understanding of the two. And this is a case where coming from JavaScript world, we might think this is okay. But in TypeScript, it means something totally different. So this is the accurate definition of a generic object. And record in TypeScript just means object. It's just another word for object. But it uses these angled brackets here. And the first thing in the angled bracket is the type of the keys. The second thing is the type of the values. And according to the JavaScript specification, keys of objects can be strings, numbers, or symbols. Symbols, the one everybody always forgets about. And unknown. The value here is unknown. We just really don't know what it is. And so this ends up being a really handy definition. And you can see there's like other ways of typing that definition. TypeScript has multiple syntaxes. So you can see that you can specify this in multiple ways. This I find to be the most concise way. And this is a recipe. This is something that you ought to like copy down. And I find it so useful all the time. So, all right, enough about objects. Let's look at any. And how does any let you break contracts? Well, here we have a bug. We have this variable age, and it's got an error message on here. It's saying, hey, type string is not assignable to type number. I gave it a string, and the contract that this variable has is it's going to get a number. And the reason that this is a TypeScript error is because if we then later go and operate on it as a number with a reasonable expectation that it's going to be a number, we get a bug. And so this is exactly what TypeScript is for, is to warn us about these bugs. And so what some developers will do is just say, as any. Now no TypeScript error, right? The error went away. So that was easy. TypeScript is easy. You just put any on everything. Yeah, don't do this. This is a really bad idea. Don't do that. You could do the same thing here with functions. This function is going to get a birth date, and its contract is that it's saying this variable is going to be of type date. And yet we just passed to it some erroneous string. This function is most likely going to break. That's why TypeScript is telling us, hey, you can't take a string and make it into a date. But if we just as any, oh, magic any to the win, for the win. Yep, no more TypeScript error. Don't do this. Don't do this. So this is where I see it most often in people's code, in some little handler function. Oftentimes they've used TypeScript in an admirable way, all the way through the file. And yet when they get to the error handler, they're like, I don't know what this thing is. And I'm only just piping it out to console, so like, who cares? In every case, unknown is better. This is publishable code. With any in there, it's not publishable code. This is fine. We still don't know what error is, but we've explicitly said that we don't know what it is. And so if we'll see that unknown has some different properties than any. Like, let's look at this example. This is a callback of some sort. It's going to get a result. We don't know what the result's going to be, so somebody put in there any. Well, when we go there and we try to flip it out with unknown, we then get this error. Property item does not exist on type unknown. And this is the value of unknown, is that if you start to try to use an unknown value, it's going to flag it and say, hey, if you know there's an item property, then you do in fact know something about this object. And all it wants us to do is say item is a string. No TypeScript error. We know that is the shape of the object, so we provide that to TypeScript. And I think the reason that people don't do it in this error case or maybe in this result case is they're thinking like, this error object has a whole definition, like it includes lots and lots of stuff. And I certainly don't want to define everything that error has right here in this stupid little error handler. So they use any because they're like, it's got a broad definition, but we don't have to provide the broad definition. And in fact, in this case, we don't. Result may have other stuff. We don't care. All we have to define is the stuff that we use. So it really is easy to fix. It's just people don't quite know how or something. I don't know. So let's look at why any is so bad. It spreads. Yuck. Here's our code. This is the code we're trying to write. We're trying to make a variable. It's called book. And we've got this string here. It's got some YAML in it. Somebody wrote a parse YAML function, and we imported that function. And parse YAML made use of this parse something, and that was also, they imported that from someplace else. And so 2 layers back in the import chain, somebody used an any. So something to parse is any. And since they returned the same variable that they received, the function returns an any. Then when we make use of the function, even though we gave it a string, the result is any. And then when we make use of that function, book is any. And now we can call book.fantasy. We can call book as a function. Both of these lines clearly will fail, and yet no TypeScript errors because of this any 2 files behind us that then infected this and then infected our variable. So yeah, any spreads. And this is what I see commonly. This is another one. This one I actually found in the wild. And it's valiant. This is so valiant. It's like the developer knew any was a bad idea. And they were like, okay, well, I still don't know what it is, but I'm gonna at least try to provide some structure around it. It's a promise of an array of any's, or it's an object and the any's are in the values. Now, in both of these cases, unknown would be better. But I still see these definitions. And the problem with these definitions is that even though we are providing structure around the any, eventually that structure will unwind and we'll be left with an any, which will start spreading. Yeah, not good. Okay. So if you're new to TypeScript, this is the most complex example probably that we'll look at. This is the kind of most in-depth. But so this is more for the advanced people. If you don't totally understand everything, it's fine, but just want to show another way, another thing about this. This is inference is what we're talking about here. So we defined a type here, task, and we said that we're going to tell task a type, and then it's going to be a function that returns a promise of that same type. So here we have a function, and we're returning a promise of true. So the question the developer asked, this came up in Slack, was why do I have to specify the type on task, right? Because what TypeScript wants us to do here is put Boolean. And then it's happy. But the developer was like, why do I have to specify this? TypeScript should be smart enough to understand that this is a promise of true and infer this type right back to here, but it can't. And so then if this is done in a file that is not TypeScript, type checked, like in some third-party library, and we make use of this task 1, well, it's of type any. And now that spreads to our value. We can call value.fantasy. We can call value as a function, all because we didn't resolve this error and TypeScript wasn't smart enough to infer it. So how do we get TypeScript to infer in that case? That's the question we're going to try and answer this time. And actually, we just have to do it a little bit differently. We define a function called runTask, which it gets an abstract type, R, and we're going to say that the task is going to have that same abstract type, and the return of it is going to be a promise of that same abstract type. And since we've done this as a function, rather than just as a definition of a value, when we call runTask and pass it that same function that we defined this as up here, it is able to understand the inference chain, that true is a Boolean, and runTask, in fact, the task of Booleans And task 2 is in fact a promise of Booleans. Any thoughts, questions, comments about that? Like I said, that one's a little more complex because you're choosing these abstract types. So, all right, well, let's just move on. Okay, yeah, don't do this. Yeah, you shouldn't store any data in the window object, and document is part of the window object. Why would we set a variable on document called animal? That would be definitely an anti-pattern. But that's not really the point. Maybe you have to do this. Maybe you don't have a choice. You have to do this. Or maybe you have to do something else that's similar. The idea is that here, this is the case where the thing we're trying to set the value on does in fact have a very thorough definition. I can look at that definition. We go to document. Oh yeah, there it is. Oh no, here. Let me go to this one. Come on. There we go. Yeah, there it is. All of this. Yeah. So I definitely don't want to redeclare all of this. And yet I don't have any control over any of that, right? This is somebody else's. This is defined by the browser, probably. So how do I get animal into there without the TypeScript error, animal does not exist on type document? Well, one way people try to do is this. Again, there's that as any, total anti-pattern. Don't do this. This is super sus. Super sus. Don't do this. Don't do that. There's a very easy way to fix it, and it's just this. Like, we don't even have to modify our original line of code. We declare an interface called document and give it a animal as a string. Simple. Now, we don't have to redeclare everything that's already part of document because interfaces are additive. So if the thing we're trying to add on to was created using the interface keyword, and that's the big problem with TypeScript, there's more than one way to do everything. But if it was created with interface, then all we have to do is define the new property and TypeScript is happy. Now, if document were defined with the type keyword instead of interface, it's a little more complex, a little more messy. We do have to modify our original line of code. We have to create a new type, which is a union of document and our new property. Then we still have to use the as keyword and cast document as our new type. That then allows us to add our property. Make sense? Cool. All right. Prefer unknown to any. Anything is better than unknown. Unknown is almost the worst case scenario. Any is the worst case scenario and is never what we should have. Unknown, sometimes unknown is correct. I mean, if we can provide more definition, we should. As I said all the way up at the top, right? The ideal case is a shape. We tell it what properties they are and what the values will be. But this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the thing I see very frequently. So the developer's trying to create this bar variable, but they're making use of something else that was defined, and that something else has a very thorough definition. And they know the definition of the thing they're trying to create, but they can't get these two definitions to align with each other, right? We take some out of foo and it's like, well, no, that's this type and you want it to be this type, and they don't match. And if they're, complex types, sometimes it's difficult to figure out how to make them match. And every TypeScript book and every TypeScript class teaches this pattern. It's a complete anti-pattern. This is definitely not what we should do, but it works. And every time in the book, they'll say, yeah, don't do this unless you can't figure out anything else to do. Worst case scenario, you can do this and it'll just work. And unknown is a drop-in replacement here, and that's now publishable code. Now, some developers will argue with me over this point. They'll say, well, what's the difference? I mean, if I have any in there, well, I immediately recast it as bar. So bar is bar. Like, this any isn't going to spread. It can't spread. It's stuck in there. And there's only this moment where the thing is any. It's like starts off as foo, and then it's momentarily any, and then it gets bar. So what's the difference? Why exactly is unknown better? And the issue is that, we're agile now. All software development is agile. I mean, should be probably. And so every line of code we write is meant to be rewritten by someone else later to improve it. And so it's very likely case that while we may write this statement as one statement, later someone else will have to come in and refactor it and break apart the first part and the second part and do something else in between. So an example of that might be like here, we get an API result from some endpoint and we don't know what it is. So we're like, that's fine. We have confidence. And then at the end of our code, we use as to cast it back as book. So then we're like, ta-da, it got book, right? And yeah, maybe there was some sketchy stuff in here. Maybe this was a little sus, but hey, I have confidence. And this any was in here and they broke it apart. They start with the any and then later they cast it as the book and then do other stuff in between. And there's no type scripting here in between. And the way that I'm using the word confidence here, confidence is an anti-pattern. We don't want developers to be confident. We want developers to be able to prove that what they write is correct. So use unknown instead. And if here we use unknown and then we deal with that unknown value inside here, then that's no longer confidence. But we have to deal with this variable because type book does not exist on unknown. So we have to deal with that somehow. Okay. All right, so we're going to start one last kind of little bit bigger example, and then we'll wrap up. So the question really comes down to, how do we accept a value that is of an unknown type and give it a type? Similar to an example we saw earlier, process the results, going to receive a result. We don't know what that result is, but if we do know it has item, we could replace this unknown with a shape that includes item and everything would be fine. But we're still casting this as book. Even if we dealt with that, I don't know, we're still doing a cast here. So anytime you're using as, that's TypeScript. That doesn't have any effect on runtime code. So if this item is not in fact a book, we're going to get a runtime error. So how do we deal with this? How do we take something that is truly unknown and put some definition around it? And we do that with is functions. Ooh. So I said prefer is to as. I don't mean this is. It doesn't matter what you call the function. I mean this is right here. So in TypeScript, the part that goes right before the arrow, after the input properties, colon, and then the value of that the function will return. And we're saying this function is going to return a value, and the value is going to be a book. And so is still kind of like confidence, but what we're saying is we are going to explicitly define how to convert a value from unknown state to this new type in runtime code. This is the exact thing that TypeScript doesn't provide. Before, when we were using as, TypeScript was not providing any safety around that. When we use is, we are saying we're going to describe the safety that is required to do the transition from unknown to book. So first we, say, hey, the type of it is an object. And that gets rid of undefined. So that's cool. Value is not equal to null. That gets rid of null. And it's not an array. Cool. So we should have just a generic object. But we get this error. Property name does not exist on type object. And if we had, I don't know, just coming from JavaScript world, or if we not really sussed out what object means in TypeScript, this would seem completely bizarre. Why can't object have a name property? What is wrong with that? And that is because object can be all kinds of things. It can be undefined. And so even though this line defines it as not being undefined, TypeScript's not smart enough to figure it out. Let's watch. Value starts, it's unknown. After this line, it gets the type of object. Now, this disqualifies undefined, and yet the type definition includes something that we know it can't be, So that's not great. But why did TypeScript do that? And in fact, even after this null line, we get to here, it's still just object. And we get down to here, it's still just object. And then we get our error. And that's because TypeScript does not have an accurate generic object definition. Remember, all the way up at the top, I defined that generic object. I was like, that thing's going to come in handy someday. This buddy. TypeScript doesn't have this. It only has these. And it doesn't, there's nothing specific enough. There is no type in TypeScript that says object array or null, but not undefined. That's not one of the default types that TypeScript has. So we still have a problem. What we in fact have to do is make this into two is functions, and the error goes away. So let's look at is object here. Now we were doing, this is what is object was doing before when we got the error message, taking in unknown, and it was casting it as object. And it was even through these three validation lines, it still thought it was underscore object. Now, if instead we say, okay, we know that this is going to make this a generic object because it's not null, it's not undefined, and it's not an array, it's a generic object. I copied the definition down here so you could see it. With as object, casting it as generic object, now we can watch the value comes in, it's unknown. We get down to the next line, it's a generic object, which does have a property called name. We just don't know what the value is going to be. And here we're testing the type of the value against string. So it's got a name and it's got an author. That's enough for me to certify it's a book. Here's our book definition. There's a name and an author, and they're both strings. Yay! So key takeaways: don't publish any and avoid as. If you know the shape of something, use the shape. That's the golden rule. I mean, it's so simple. And a lot of times you don't have to define the whole shape, just the part of the shape you're using. Use unknown if you truly don't know, right? That's what it's for. It's when you really don't know what that thing is. And then validate unknown values using is functions. So that's my wrap. I included this link here, Type Challenges. This is just a fun website. It has like more example TypeScript stuff like this. It's got some puzzles for you to figure out. So if you enjoyed this presentation, if you like TypeScript a lot, that can be a really fun way to build your skills. So that's that. Thoughts, questions, comments, jokes? Anybody know any TypeScript jokes? String walks into a number and I don't know.
Great job, Bishop. I really enjoyed that. I understand TypeScript at least a little bit better. I've seen some of these things, and like I think I didn't really understand why we needed to do those things, or why unknown was like, why was unknown actually better than any? What advantages did it give you? And you really covered that well. There was one question in the chat. I'll just jump on. Would optional chaining with question mark dot be an option to fix the first is book function? Yeah, so like value dot question mark dot name with that.
About this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk about that. In this case, it doesn't quite solve, because it's not the fact that value might be undefined. It's an interesting idea. We may be able to find some solution for that where that would help. But this is another anti-pattern. I hate to say it, and I see developers use it all the time. And so my first warpath was against any's. My second warpath is against these optional things. And if you do a bang, it's not any better. And you know, people think of this as a real value, because especially like the people I was talking about, the backend developers that are new to JavaScript and TypeScript, and they're just like, oh, this is awesome. If I don't know what this is, I can just put one of these two things in front of it, and then TypeScript stops complaining. But TypeScript was complaining for a very good reason. The complaint here would be that value might be unknown, undefined. And the question mark says, just pretend that it is defined. But that doesn't affect runtime code. So in runtime, even if we solve the situation with these question marks, in runtime, if value was undefined, the function would fail and we get a runtime error. So TypeScript is giving us valuable error messages. And instead of using these question marks and exclamation points in line like that, find a better way to do it. Just validate what the value of that value is. Like do something like this, or value does not equal undefined, or something like that, in order to validate that value has it. And then the TypeScript error will go away. The TypeScript error is on here saying it might be undefined, not saying that we should fix it right here. It's saying we should go up here in the function and fix it and say, you know, value is not undefined. Is that making sense? So yeah, good thought. And it's a tool in TypeScript. It's just, it doesn't affect runtime code. So it's dangerous. And similar to any, it disables type checking. I mean, that's what it does. Not good.
I got a question. What in TypeScript is still, do you find either complex or unwieldy to use?
Oh my goodness.
Or you don't know anymore, or you don't know very well?
No, it's this. It's this. There's two different ways of defining. There's interface versus type. They do almost exactly the same thing and yet have completely different syntax. And then yet there's this third syntax that you can use. Oh, and by the way, you can also use the abstract syntax, which just makes it so hard. You're going through and different people like different things. So I tend to place a lot of value around being easy to read, making it easy to read, making it concise. And so for me, you know, I only use this syntax, but the fact that there's so many of them makes it a barrier for new people. It's a scalability concern when you have a large code base and you have 4 different ways of saying the same thing. So yeah, for me, that's the big one. And it's type versus interface, and then all these various different syntaxes that you can use.
I get that too.
That's my biggest struggle currently. I guess the other hard part is that's a struggle that I really wish we could get rid of. Another part that is a struggle, sometimes it's hard to match 2 different definitions. That's the other big struggle that I run into. Yeah, this one. When you've got 2 different definitions and you're trying to make use of the first one to make it into the second one. And since, you know, if these 2 definitions are not using the same syntax, it can be really difficult to figure out how to make the 2 match each other. And the error messages, as the definitions get more complex, the error messages get more complex. And so I'll get these error messages where it's like 100 lines. And I'm like, I don't even know what that's trying to tell me.
Tyler Joseph asked a good follow-up question, and maybe you can help disambiguate. Like with the interface and type, the result is the same regardless. Is the result the same regardless of how you construct it, or what is the nuance there? Like I've definitely experienced where I could use either interchangeably, and I'm trying to find the words to like. I have trouble finding the words, I should say, like explaining why you use one over the other.
Yeah, like here. So personally, I use I use interface 99% of the time. And then I only use type to define raw types. So things like unions, and if I do want something where it's like a string or a number, you know, then I'll make string or number as a type, and then I can include that in my interfaces. That's how I do it. I've read in books where other people do it that way too. But I think when TypeScript started, there was a large difference between the 2. They were very different. And as TypeScript has evolved, they became more and more similar, just with slightly different syntax. And so I think when TypeScript started, they turned into like 2 camps where some people like to do it one way and other people like to do it the other. And now you just got diversity, even though they're almost exactly the same. Other than the syntax, it's not that they can do different things. It's just because of this union syntax or the or syntax, or the fact that interfaces are additive, that makes it easier to do some sorts of things with interface like this than with type. This is a little bit difficult to do with type.
Yeah. Our interface, I mean, interface is like, it definitely has this, but it could be a little more flexible otherwise, whereas types are more fixed. Is that one way to think about it, or am I misspeaking?
I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I don't think there's any difference in how they're evaluated. But like I'll see people do like read only. Oh no, sorry, that's supposed to be on string. But do stuff like this. Then it's a string, but it's a read only string. And I don't know, it's kind of it's using an abstract type syntax here, but you can do those on either types or interfaces. I see them with interfaces more. People provide additional specificity, like things like a read only or a partial, where you can say it has, all these properties are optional. And so you can include these kind of things. And I see them more included with interfaces, though I think you can do them on types too.
Okay. That might have been what I was thinking of with partials. Very cool. Somebody else asked a really good question. I was going to ask this anyway, because I think it's come up in past meetups, but like, are there what's your recommendation for learning TypeScript with React, or how to approach learning TypeScript in general? I would say it's a really common question I see. What is your opinion and thoughts there?
I'm a book learner. I mean, that's how I learn everything. I read books. For me, I knew a lot about typing in JavaScript already. So I had a lot of background in the parts of JavaScript that this works with already. So I jumped kind of straight to an intermediate book. And I got, Effective TypeScript. It's an O'Reilly book. And It's just a series. I mean, a lot of some of the examples I used in here came out of that book. And it's just like, it's like 100 best practices. And so for me, that was the best way to learn, was to just dive right down into the details and be like, how should I be doing this? For other people, if you're truly beginner and you don't have some of that JavaScript background maybe that I had, you probably want the other O'Reilly book, which is just Intro to TypeScript. That'll take you more step by step. I don't know. The learning path is still so hard because of all the different syntaxes. So I think that's just the first hurdle to get over.
Salim posted in chat. I know he's checked out a few different course programs, and he recommended UI.dev for TypeScript and React with TypeScript. Somebody else posted a cheat sheet. There's also the TypeScript Playground, typescriptlang.org. I think that goes to it. But there's a TypeScript Playground where you can like live edit code and play around. And I haven't used it that much myself, but a lot of people have plugged it.
I've used the cheat sheets for sure. And what was that other one? UI.dev?
UI.dev, yeah. That's funny. UI.dev. Yep, that's the one.
Really it's trying to outsmart me.
I love how you did this presentation. I haven't seen this in a while, like when it's just a code file. And I think I like the presentation style.
Thanks. Yeah, I thought it was appropriate. I didn't want a lot of pomp and circumstance. I don't know. And type challenges, that was my other recommendation of someplace to learn. I also like puzzles. And so I haven't gone through a bunch of them, but that's something that if I was learning, this is what I would do.
Yeah, that's Sheila posted that.
Oh, sweet.
Very cool. I like that. That's probably more my tune too. I need to like do something to learn it.
Yeah.
I will say I've been able to go almost 4 years now, just fumbling through TypeScript and sort of getting by.
Yeah, and that's what I see a lot of developers, and it's just like the question mark in the middle of the line and not understanding that that's not runtime code. And so they think they're doing it right. They really want to do it right, but they think that any is actually what they're supposed to put there. And so it's just like, yeah, you spread the knowledge. And for me, I get on code review now. So now code review is like my favorite thing. And be like, hey, this is how you're supposed to do it.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else had another question. I like, if I have a code base that I want to slowly refactor from JS to TypeScript, would any be the way to go then, or do your rules still apply? Sounds more overwhelming than resorting to any in the beginning when everything is still JavaScript code.
That's a good point. It's a good point. The any is one of those tools that you can use for a transition a code base over. Another thing you can do is most people run TypeScript with no implicit any turned on. And at some point you do want to turn that on, but I would not recommend turning that on first, because then you're just going to go through your whole code base and write any's everywhere. No. Keep that off for now. Start to provide some of those definitions so that when you do flip that on, a bunch of stuff is already done. When you do flip that on, instead of going through and adding any's, go through and add unknowns. And what you'll find is that sometimes unknown works, maybe 50-50, but that's at least 50% better than having all of them be any's. So yeah, use any when you have to, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. Right there, I'm gonna stop the recording and just give you a big thank you. We'll hang out and chat afterwards, but thank you, Bishop. That was fantastic.
Bye.